Hi.
Hi.
Just finished filming on Kitchen Cabinet.
Woohoo!
Yeah. I love that
Was
kind
it
of...
fun or is it just stressful?
It's always fun and interesting. But it was stressful this year because I took some time off when my sister-in-law died or before she died, actually. And so everything got like squished up a little bit. So it was, but it's sort of a bit the end of an era because my producer is sort of winding up at the ABC, and so a bit emotional, and but it's such a good season. So the last one that we shot just now was Jordan Steele-John, who is a Greens senator from WA. He's also the first person in a wheelchair to be in the Senate, and just such an amazingly interesting life story, and a very modest, funny person. We had a really good time.
That's great.
And so many insights about the assumptions that are made about how Parliament House works and how it really works if you show up in a chair, because there are so many things that people don't really spot about how hard that is.
It is so good. Like you talking about his episode makes me think also of the Daly episode. It is so good to have people in the Parliament, regardless of what party they're in, who have had a life experience that not many people in the Parliament have had. And so Daly's, where she talked about coming to Australia as a refugee and her experience of being on a boat and what that was like. Oh my God, it was incredibly moving, right? Hearing her talk about that experience, and then other challenges in her life, having breast cancer, and it's so valuable to hear those stories.
I think with Jordan, he was homeschooled by his mum, and he grew up with an understanding of his disability that wasn't about, there being something wrong with him. It was about, what you're great at. And I think when he was at home with his mum, a lot of time he'd hear her navigating the health system on the phone, hours and hours on end, trying to get a good result for him, trying to get the appointments she needed. Also dealing with welfare organisations that didn't have much money at all because they had all sorts of health issues happening. And I think that having people in the Parliament who know how hard it is to navigate these bureaucratic systems as a client is actually really important, because if you haven't had tough times, you don't really kind of know how hard that stuff is.
Not that you get into this on the show, but one of the things I find really interesting about politics, and I feel like it's not often explored, because people often, when they write about politics, write about strategy, whereas you're looking more at people's actual lives and the bigger story. When I'm watching it, I often am thinking about politics and psychology, and when you see these people's backstories, what I find fascinating is thinking about then where their political views have ended up.
Yep.
And so it's really intriguing, because clearly some people, if they end up, say, at the Liberal Party end of politics, they might have had a tough upbringing, they might have been in poverty, they might have been through trauma and challenges and all of that kind of stuff. And for whatever reason, where they've landed at is the power of the individual to triumph over circumstances. And then other people, they have similar tragedy, trauma, challenging life experiences, and where they end up is the power of the collective.
Right.
And I find that just intriguing, that, something makes you go in one direction or the other, and you can be at these really different places.
Well, I think Di Lee and Jordan Steele-John are really good examples of that, because, Di Lee, as a 7-year-old, is on this boat. She doesn't know why she's there, and she has this realisation. She thinks, I am all alone. There is actually, I'm here with my mum, I'm here with my 2 little sisters, but if this boat goes over, they can't help me. I am, nobody can help me. And so perhaps that's a turning point for her. Whereas Jordan Steele-John grew up in a house with 4 generations of his family. They all lived together. So his perception about how to address problems is as part of a kind of collective, and is wound up in the Greens. And, and even Peter Dutton, for instance, who, had a pretty comfortable childhood, but then went into the cops and was quite damaged, I think, by all the stuff that he saw there, really terrible crimes committed against children and that sort of thing. That's changed him too. And I think that he's developed this sort of goodies and baddies, lock up the baddies, just it's sort of like a defensive fear response to the terrible things that he's seen. Like, so people's early experiences are massively significant in terms of the decisions they make in politics.
So I watched this film yesterday that kind of speaks to a few of these themes. One is around, stories that you don't often hear, and the other is about similar upbringing but different outcome. To give a bit of... So let me give some context first as to how I got to it. Lisa Miller and I are recording this podcast about the TV show The Newsreader. It's about to come back.
So one of those companion podcast type things.
Exactly,
That's such a good idea.
For the ABC. And so we've been recording
So you're doing that, so you chose to do that with your best friend rather than...
I did, yeah.
Cool,
yeah.
Right.
But, she's allowed me to make time for my second best friend, so, here I am.
Very understanding of it.
So we... because it's like a companion podcast thing, it kind of follows the model, I guess, of the, say, Succession podcast, where it's partly us chatting and then we interview people associated with the show in the back half of the show. And so one of the episodes, the new season of The Newsreader, I might add, is absolutely fantastic. It's really great. It's better than the first season. It's fantastic. So one of the episodes, because it's set obviously in the 1980s, is in 1988, and it's the bicentenary celebrations. And the episode is written by this Indigenous screenwriter called Adrian Russell Wills, gay Indigenous man. He came in for an interview so we could talk about the episode. And you know how sometimes you're talking to people and you just immediately like, oh, I just love you.
Yeah.
Like I just click with you straight away. He was like that, and he was just such a beautiful, humble person who's written on Redfern now, Wentworth, like major shows, done his own films, and then he kept referring to it. He was so humble. Every time we'd try to go, Adrian, you've done a fantastic job with this episode, it's so nuanced, he'd be like, oh, well, it was partly just that, and he would constantly be trying to give credit elsewhere. He was so humble. Anyway, I just loved him. He just had like beautiful, warm, gentle energy.
Do you know what I like about that is that honestly, sometimes people think like the writing on a show is just an invisible thing, or that, that TV shows that work because they are great actors, or being directed by great directors or whatever. But actually, like, the writing is like, if the writing's not
you got
good,
nothing to work with,
then you can tell that the actors are uncomfortable. It's hard to watch, like, so something like Mr. Inbetween, which is I think one of the best written Australian TV shows I've ever seen. Part of its compelling nature is that the writing is so sharp.
Yeah.
And so I mean, but it's not something you specifically always notice. It's more of a sense. You're like, why is this working? Whereas this feels awkward and embarrassing.
If something works, at the heart of it, in my view, I would say this probably because I'm a writer, I'm biased, but it has to be good writing. You can't make something good if it's not well written.
Yeah.
You can elevate something that's maybe average writing to be really good if the performances are great, but you are not going to be able to overcome, you're not going to be able to get to true greatness, I don't reckon, if the writing's not there. Anyway, so interviewing Adrian Russell Wills. And so we're talking to him about, well, what was your experience of the bicentennial? And so he had been adopted at 3 days old. He was born in Bourke. He was unwell as a baby. He was sent to Sydney. His family was told that he died, but he was actually adopted out.
Far out.
And so he was adopted by this extremely wealthy white family in Mossman. And so his upbringing was with this very affluent family. And so when he talked about 1988, he said, it was actually a real pivotal moment in my life because we were on a boat on Sydney Harbour for the celebrations, and he said it was like the Sydney elite and everyone was dressed in white. And so it was his parents, and it was Nick Whitlam, Nick Greiner, like that level of Sydney elite. And he said at a certain point he looked at the shore and there was like an Indigenous protest at the shore, and he had this feeling of,
am I on the right boat?
I'm in the wrong place. I'm supposed to be over there. And so,
wow. And
so he then had a friend who kept saying to him, you got to meet my friend Jill, who was also an Indigenous woman who had been adopted by a fairly, not affluent, but like they lived at Avalon, so not affluent, Sydney family. And so eventually Adrian and Jill met, I think in their 20s, and then they became like best friends. And so Jill's Gillian Moody, her name is, she's a television producer.
Right, yeah.
So they've made this film which just had a release at the Melbourne Film Festival called Kindred. And so when we finished the interview, of course, Adrian and I kept yapping on because we were getting on great. And then he very kindly sent me, because I said, I'd love to watch that because I found his backstory so intriguing. So he sent me a screener so I could watch the film. And it's just the most beautiful film So it's basically him and Gillian. It starts just with them kind of jumping in a car and going somewhere together. And it's about kind of the, I guess, grounding of it is their friendship and this very unusual thing that they came across each other, these two black kids raised in affluent white families. And then it follows each of their process to finding their birth family and connecting with their birth family. And then just what it was like to kind of grow up in these environments and then, you know, I guess where you kind of in this no man's land where you don't know your birth family, and even when you meet them they're kind of strangers to you, but you look at them and they like look similar to you, and there's a kind of sense of connectedness there. But then also, you know, you've grown up in this affluent white world. And so Adrian's experience was that he had ended up having massive conflict with his family, his adopted family, and had basically been thrown out when he was in his late teens. And then he kind of found his way, he got embraced by the Sydney gay community, kind of found his way from there. And then he found his family in Burke and so forth. And then Gillian's story was that she found her birth family who were in southern New South Wales, and then she had a much happier experience with her adopted family. They were very close-knit. She absolutely loved them. Her experience was harder because she felt like, I don't want to hurt my adopted mum because I just absolutely love her. Yeah. And then now there's this woman down the South Coast that I've also got this connection with. But her adopted mother was so gorgeous in the way that she kind of embraced, you know, the other side of the family as well. So it was just the most powerful and moving exploration of these two lives and what it left you with. And I sent Adrian a message after I watched it and said, what it really just left me with was just the power of love and connection with other human beings. And, you know, Adrian and Jill had that with each other, but then they'd also found it with this diverse array of people, some of whom were family members, some of whom were not, some of whom were people they knew well, you know, some of whom they didn't. And yeah, it was a profoundly beautiful piece of work that I hope gets seen by a lot of people. Kindred.
What about, I mean, just even human resilience and ability to kind of extract love even from like a life circumstance that is stressful and puts you in a position where you don't know who you are, or you've got to choose, or, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, our episode of Kitchen Cabinet with Linda Burney, which aired recently, I mean, her story is just one of the most extraordinary, I think, in the Australian Parliament. She was, her teenage mother left the hospital when she was born and nobody wanted her. She had a black dad and a white mum, but her dad didn't even know that she was pregnant and didn't know of Linda's existence until Linda was about 30, whereupon Linda discovered she had 10 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
Whoa. Anyway.
That's a bit like Adrian.
Right. Yeah. But what happened was that Linda's elderly great aunt and uncle, brother and sister duo who lived together in a really rudimentary home, took her in, and they looked after her till she was about 13 or 14, and then she looked after them because they were elderly and they died when she was in her mid-teens. Anyway, I'm always interested in the effect that these early life experiences have, as you know. And
also how sometimes people can kind of unlock something for you. Like one of the most profound bits in Kindred was Adrian's talking about how the world he grew up in, you know, you were kind of valued by your achievement. And he was good at sport at school. And so it's like you're valued by how much money you have, who you are, what your status is, what kind of house you have, how much you've excelled in your chosen field and so on. And then he said, and then he felt like he wasn't really any of that. And then when he connected with his birth family, he was made to feel like your presence alone is value. That's your value, is your presence. And it was that kind of just acceptance that you don't really have to bring anything here other than yourself, and, you know, we are happy with you. He had this incredible woman in the show, Eunice, who was his aunt, I think, and she was just so incredibly wise, and he's kind of just shown up, and she's like, oh yeah, I knew you hadn't died. She said, I've been looking for you. And, you know, for years, it was like, you know, he was 30 by this point. She was like, I've been looking for you every year on your birthday. I'd try to ring people to find out where you were. I just knew that you weren't gone because I would have felt it. It was just really incredible. Loved it.
It just reminds me of a book that I read a few months back. I went to a session just randomly at the Sydney Writers' Festival and saw Paul Callaghan speaking about the book that he's written with Uncle Paul Gordon called The Dreaming Path. And he talks a bit about his like real young, high-flying public servant, bureaucrat, and he had this full nervous breakdown when he was about 30. And he was married, had a house, a couple of cars, couple of kids, doing really well. And he just fell apart. And he writes about this in the book. And he just went back on country to kind of establish who he was. And the techniques that he talks about, discovering, forgiving himself for failing at something and being able to embrace life is so profound. I found it a really useful book and would recommend it.
While we're on deeply meaningful life lessons, I finally watched Still, the Michael J. Fox doco that you had recommended to me to watch. Which
first recorded instance of me watching something to do with Michael J. Fox before you. Yep.
I mean, that was just incredible. One of the lines that stayed with me was when he said, or talking about life, he said, you think it's made out of bricks and cement, but it's made out of paper and feathers. Mm-hmm. And there were just so many moments to love in that. I mean, it didn't make me cry as much as I thought it would, mostly because he's just so incredible. He just is so, his strength is just gobsmacking. I think you talked about the bit at the start where he's walking down the street and then this woman goes, "Oh my God, it's Michael J. Fox, wow." And he sort of says hi, and then it's so difficult for him to walk and be balanced. The mere act of doing that, he falls over. And then the woman kind of turns around. He's with a carer, and the woman kind of turns around, and then Michael J. Fox goes, "Lady, you knocked me off my feet." Like just his way of, managing stuff. There was a beautiful anecdote too where when he's cast in Back to the Future, or no, it's Family Ties, when he gets the Family Ties role, the studio executive who's interviewed in it says, Michael J. Fox, what? Like that little pipsqueak, like he's not going to be marketable. Like I can't see him, his face being on kids' lunchboxes. And then Family Ties, of course, is massive and Michael J. Fox is the biggest star. And then Michael J. Fox gets a lunchbox made with his face on it and sends it to the executive. It was just so beautiful. But it was the stuff on Family Ties with Tracy Pollan where he meets her is very moving, kind of watching them as young people get together.
The other thing is that it's such an incredible piece of filmmaking because obviously the documentary, the master interview is with Michael J. Fox today. Yeah. But what they managed to do is, and because Family Ties is just such a long-running show, basically every plot line imaginable was being canvassed in that show. Yeah. And so, for example, when he's recounting making back in Time for Dinner, I was about to say, what's it called?
On the way here in the car, I said to Crabb, I said, when you did that show Old People's Home for Dinner? And she was like, you have just managed to clash together two entirely separate shows I did. Yeah.
Anyway, Back to the Future. Back to the Future was the, oh God. But he was making Family Ties full time at that time. And so they made him shoot for Back to the Future at night. So he was working two jobs. Oh. And because that's the only way he could do it.
He'd go home and sleep for 3 hours in between. And then
unbelievable.
His driver would come up and make a cup of coffee so that he could just get maximum amount of sleep. Oh my God. I don't know how he did it.
However, there was in Family Ties a storyline where Alex takes on a second job. And so they actually managed to slot in this dialogue with contemporary of the time, Michael J. Fox saying, "It's killing me. It's killing me."
They use a whole lot of clips from Michael J. Fox films like that where he'll talk about, I woke up after this massive bender, and they have like a scene from a film where the character's waking up because he has such an extensive body of work. You can illustrate. It's very clever. Yeah. And then the master interviews him just looking down the barrel. It's really amazingly shot. It's a really fantastic piece of work. I mean, the other thing that's incredible is because he talks about when he was making Spin City how he knew by then and had known for quite a while that he had Parkinson's, but it wasn't publicly known. Now, in hindsight, when you watch Spin City, it's so obvious. And because he talks about all the ways that he attempts to mask it and like certain days of shooting where things were really bad. And he's like, I just walked around with one of my hands in my pocket the whole time because I could not stop shaking. And when they play the clips of days when he's struggling, and after he's told you all the techniques he uses to mask it, it's kind of heartbreaking. It's so obvious that something was wrong. Anyway, it was a terrific doco. It's on Apple, I think.
I watched something.
Became unusually serious this episode.
I'm about to just throw the switch to vaudeville a little bit. I watched the entire series of Hostage so that I could watch Idris Elba just be Idris.
I heard it's really bad.
Yeah, it's not great.
Okay.
But I kept watching it anyway.
Did you just turn the volume down and just watch Idris?
A little bit, yeah. Oh, look, it's fine. It's, suspenseful. The idea is that Idris Elba is this sort of negotiator. He's split up with his wife. He's now dating a hot new guy who's a cop. And he's flying home to I don't know, try and fix things, I think. And he happens to be on a plane that gets hijacked. Right. And the hijackers, you sort of start to work who they are.
This is basically Die Hard, except it stays on the plane instead of going
totally
to
Die Hard
Plaza.
on a plane. Yeah, that's
okay.
right. Yeah. And so anyway, I mean, he's wearing a snug fitting jumper. That's all you need to know. Like, he's just. I watched till the end. At the end, I'm like, okay.
I'm just seeing
also,
your
there's
review.
a really good lady traffic controller who I really liked as well.
I don't know why that just made me think of this, but my friend Candle Melanie sent me to a film that was
she's lovely. She's got other skills. Yeah.
It was part of a Scandi film festival, and she said, I highly recommend this. It's funny and kind of tense. And so I went and had a look at it. It was called Wild Game. It was an Icelandic film, and the premise of it was this group of friends of all about our age, mostly couples and one single dude, are having a dinner party at one of the friends' place. Clearly they're friends who catch up all the time. They've known each other for years and years. And they end up deciding to play this game where everyone has to put their phones on the table and any call, any text that comes in, calls have to be taken on speakerphone and texts have to be read aloud to the table.
Oh. No way!
Absolutely no way. And it goes from there. And immediately you start thinking,
that's such a good premise.
It was a great premise. Immediately you're thinking, maybe it's going to be, someone's going to be busted for having an affair. Yeah. But there's so many calls you can have that are awkward, like a medical thing or one of the characters, the daughter rings to speak to the father and then she's kind of talking about the mother, who of course then is sitting right there hearing it. Anyway, it was borderline. I mean, it's black comedy, but for me, it was getting to borderline horror because it was just someone's phone would ring and you'd be like, oh, I just don't know how much more of this I can take. It was chilling. Yeah, it was really chilling. It was stressful.
Do you have to go to Scandi Film Festival to see this or can you find it somewhere?
Well, keep an eye out for it. It's called Wild Game. I did see it as part of a film festival. But,
God.
Yeah.
Actually, that actually gives me horrors.
It's very well done. But yeah, it was actually... It made me anxious watching it, that's for sure, and made me vow that I will never, and hilariously, bloody Melanie and Canute are having us over for a dinner thing soon, and I just thought, they better not be thinking we're going to do that phone game.
Oh, they're totally going to do it.
Just saying it publicly
There'll just be like
now.
a bunch of scented candles lit around the place. Got your phones fully charged. Brilliant. Can't wait.
Leaving my phone
I'll
at
be
home.
just texting you things like, things about Melanie, just on the off chance.
Imagine how chilling it would be too, because you just can never be quite sure like who or what might call or text you randomly who you haven't heard from for ages.
Yep,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that would be pretty chilling.
So when I was on my way back from Perth, and this is where I was going to start like 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, okay.
I had the rare experience of being on a plane with, I'd wrapped filming, so I didn't have any prep to do. It was a weekend day, and the aircraft entertainment system was working. So I know, woo! So I watched a film called Pieces of a Woman, which it goes back a few years, and Vanessa Kirby, who is the lead role in it, was nominated for an Academy Award as Best Actress. She didn't win, but I thought, I remember hearing that was a great movie. Now, it was a slight error because I didn't know what the movie was about, and it turns out to be pretty harrowing because it's about a woman who loses her baby whilst having a home birth, and then it's sort of what happens then with her relationship with her partner. Her family want her to sue the midwife. She doesn't. I wouldn't recommend it as a cheery thing.
Want to watch this?
Because I knew that it was a great movie. That's all I knew. Like I remembered, I remember this was nominated for an Academy Award and I haven't seen it.
Right.
And the actor in it, Vanessa Kirby, is also, I was sort of like, what? Oh my God, what do I know you from?
Yeah.
She's got like shaggy sort of blonde hair. She's beautiful. But she was Princess Margaret in The Crown.
Oh, the young Princess Margaret.
Young Princess
Oh, yeah.
Margaret.
She's so beautiful.
An incredible actor. But she's got blonde hair. So I'm like,
Right.
Anyway, look, I mention it because I did watch it all the way to the end. It's a terrific movie. Her partner is played by Shia LaBeouf.
Oh, yeah.
And he is kind of like this, he's a wharfie, and she's the child of this quite posh sort of New York family. And so the mum doesn't like him at all and, you know, thinks that he's, you know, not good enough for her beautiful daughter, is doing things like, you know, bought them a car so that, you know, because he can't provide sort of thing. Like, it's quite a complicated set of family relationships. And Sarah Snook is in it as well.
Right.
As a cousin who is also a lawyer and gets involved. Right. Anyway, the reason I mention it just in a sort of filmmaking sense is that the film opens, or begins like very close to the beginning of the film, is a 20-minute sequence that is one shot, and it's her being in labour.
Wow.
And so it's her kind of like, you know, they're watching a movie, she's kind of like, and then she's, you know, getting increasingly the contractions. I think she's got contractions every 6 minutes or something when you start this sequence.
Right.
And it's extraordinary. Like, you know how depictions of childbirth in films are always like, you know.
Yeah.
But it's really powerful. She's incredible.
Has she chosen to have a home birth, or does the labour happen quickly and then she's just having a child?
She's chosen to have a home birth against the wishes of her mother.
Oh, okay. Right.
And she's got a midwife who she really trusts. And at the last minute, that midwife, when they call her, is busy with somebody else. Right. And so they send a different midwife.
Right.
With whom, and that makes her feel a bit panicky.
Right.
But the midwife, when she turns up, is very, you know, calming. And anyway,
it sounds stressful.
It is, and I didn't know what was going to happen while I was watching it. But like as it went on, I'm like, how is this going to become an Academy Award-winning drama unless something, you know? So I didn't know anything about the shape of the thing. But anyway, it also reminded me that there's a book that I've been wanting to mention for ages and ages. And it's about miscarriage, and it's.
I swear, everyone, I've got some cheerier content coming up.
Yeah. I'm just getting this out of the way, but like seriously, so this is by a woman called Isabelle Oderberg, who I think I was colleagues with at the Age many years ago. She's had a number of miscarriages, and she talks about how miscarriage is dealt with through the medical system, and it's absolutely fascinating. It's it's very readable tone, and it's beautifully researched, but also readable. And you know, at some points you're kind of laughing along with her. It's kind of it's really good. So sometimes people write books that are super useful, and this is one of them. I have not had a miscarriage myself, but I know many people who have, and I think it's a classic sort of thing that happens where people don't know how to deal with you, right? And as you know from researching this sort of general area in any ordinary day, there is nothing lonelier than something dreadful happening to you where people don't know how to care for you.
How to deal with it. Can I just rip through a few things that have been on my list for ages that I just feel like they're all quick, short ones. You recommended a couple of podcasts ago, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin.
Have you read it?
Yes, I went straight from, actually that was at the Adelaide show. In the airport on the way home, it was sitting right there at the front of the book pile. And so I thought, that's the universe telling me to read it. So I went and got it. It's great. I've been in a real reading slump, and it's been actually quite a good book to try to propel me a bit forward out of that. It's about a friendship that ebbs and flows over a
That was first recommended to me by Greta, the chatter who I met on the plane that time. And she's been very, very good with the recommendations.
I read Hedley Thomas, who did the Teacher's Pet podcast. There's a book that's now coming out about it that goes into it in a lot more depth and puts a lot more context around it. It's really good, and if you liked the podcast, you'd like it, but I also really recommend it for journalism students or young journalists, because it just, a bit like the podcast does, it really unpacks the way Hedley Thomas does investigative journalism, which is just a useful learning tool. I mentioned...
And Headley's in your book, isn't he?
He is, yeah. He's in Storytellers.
Storytellers.
Out now.
Out now. Sorry, I know you hate pimping, but I want to pimp your because it's a very good book.
Then I think a few times ago on the podcast I mentioned I'd started watching a very old BBC drama called Spooks.
Oh, yeah, I remember
which has
Spooks.
Matthew McFadyen.
Yeah.
And I said I was having a really hard time because I can't not see Tom from Succession, and the character's name in the show is Tom, just to make matters harder. I've pushed through and persevered, and I can watch him now. Oh. So now I feel like I'm kind of into that show more, and it's great. It's kind
Good job, Sales.
It's kind of a procedural. It's the same characters, and their stories kind of develop slowly, and then every week there's like a different case that MI5 and MI6 are involved with. So that's good. I've been meaning to talk about this for so long. Landline, great ABC show. There was an episode that I watched recently called Outback Musical. They did such a great job of it. They follow a heap of kids in different remote locations who all come together once a year in Longreach to perform a school musical. They're all kids who do School of Distance Education. And so they have to do their dance routines and their songs all learnt remotely and practiced on Zoom. And then they get together and then they have a show together. It's just the most heartwarming thing. And there's a couple of kids in it that are just so divine. It's just beautiful. It's a really great episode of Late Line. And then the last thing
Landline.
Oh, did I say Late Line?
You did, mate. Yeah, that's a dead show.
Landline.
Much lamented.
Landline. And then I'm very late to this, and people told me at the time to watch it, and I've only just gotten around to it. Mozart in the Jungle.
Oh, I haven't watched that.
Okay, on Amazon Prime. It's great. I'm really loving it because, of course, I would love something. It's about an orchestra in New York and the inner workings of the orchestra. And from what I know of orchestras, it's based on a book written by someone who was in an orchestra, so it's very true to life. I'm having a bit of a problem. I started watching it when I was watching Tar.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm going to just drop a spoiler out because I assume Mozart in the Jungle's been around so long. If you haven't watched it, it's your own fault. It's on you.
I'll take that on board.
They've got a new conductor who comes in, new artistic director, new chief conductor, who's this very passionate Spanish guy, and this young oboist is his personal assistant, and it's clear there's going to be a bit of romantic tension, and then it ends up with he, at the end of season 1, gives her a big kiss, and then there's this kind of awkward dynamic.
Amazing.
Because it was all made pre-Me Too, I'm just like, well, I know how this story's going to go. Dude, you're going to be... She's going to, in 20 years' time, claim that she was assaulted and abused, even though it's consensual, and you're going to be completely cancelled. And so that's the politics has ruined it, especially because I was watching Tar at the same time, which is in that space. So
how old is Mozart in the Jungle?
Oh, it's got to be 7 or 8 years old. Pre all of that stuff. So I'm just watching it going power imbalance and just being a complete narc the entire time. So it's just, I can't
Get your hands off the oboist. Step away from the oboist.
That's right, exactly. I'm liking it. It's an entertaining show, but I can't divorce the real world now from the kind of, because this used to be a trope, right, of things where people in power in workplaces were having relationships and it was just kind of accepted as part of the narrative. And so now I'm like, I can't. I'm having trouble watching this because I just think, dude, you can't be going around kissing your PA in a work setting.
That'd make you the head of the Spanish Football Federation.
All right, let's rock and roll.
Let's do it. That was very invigorating. Thank you.
Very invigorating. Great conversation.
Yes.
If I say so myself.
Quick reminder, Melbourne Chat 10, it draws near. What date is it again? The 13th. Friday the 13th of October.
Yes, exactly.
At Hamer Hall, we have things planned.
We do.
Anyway, end on a plug. It's very plugly. Sorry.
At least we at least we didn't drop it at the start. That's, exactly. Be thankful for small things.
All right. Go about your business.